You know, there's something that absolutely terrifies Donald Trump, and that is people understanding, as I feel like more and more people are, the reality of the contrast between his presidency and Joe Biden's presidency. And if you hear the way that people defend Donald Trump and advocate on his behalf, you realize the only way you can do that is to rewrite history in a major way. And that's what I want to get to in this segment. Essentially, the thesis is Trump is horrified that people are going to find out what a fraudulent campaign he's running. Meaning, the very basis, the premise that is brought forward from many of these MAGA Republicans is so flawed in the way that it relies on just distortions of reality and distortions of the last few years. So I'm going to take my time going through this. Please stick around for all of it. A bunch of valuable information. We're going to be essentially responding to the talking point. Were you better off 4 years ago? Or are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? As we keep hearing from these MAGA Republicans, something that if you consider what was going on 4 years ago is crazy for them to bring up. And it gives us a chance to go through the disaster that was Donald Trump and the success that has been Biden's presidency in the numbers, in some visuals. So let's go through it all. Make sure you have liked this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the alert bell. Here is the talking point. Elise Stefanik bringing it forward.
As Ronald Reagan famously asked us, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? The answer for hardworking Americans across the country is a resounding no.
All right. And then Laura Trump, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, saying a similar thing here.
And people look around and they say, am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? The answer to that is no. You can compare very easily how much better your life was with Donald Trump in office. And people...
All right. And so this relies on, and it drives me crazy, I've said it before, a collective amnesia. Okay, time went from 2019 to 2021. Things were just going wonderful, and then Biden took over, and they went to hell. That's the idea they're trying to portray, okay? And it is really dishonest, obviously, but is also sort of disgusting in a way that I've talked about in the past. We'll get into that a little bit more after I play this clip. This is the broadcast from 4 years ago yesterday on Lester Holt's show. A bit of it. Take a look.
Breaking news tonight, President Trump declaring the coronavirus a national emergency. The move freeing billions for the fight as America contracts to slow the rapidly spreading pandemic. The number of cases in the U.S. rising over 2,000, at least 49 deaths. All schools closing in a growing number of states. Millions of students impacted. Houses of worship suspending services. Landmarks, theme parks, sporting events, and concerts shutting down. The chaos at grocery stores. Lines stretching out the door. Shelves cleared out. Testing crisis, drive-through stations overflowing. President Trump vowing to boost testing and saying he takes no responsibility for widespread delays. And will the president himself be tested? What he said today after being potentially exposed. On the front lines, hospitals bracing for a possible surge in patients, already reporting shortages of masks and protective clothing. Will there be enough beds?
So don't you want to go back 4 years ago? Oh, so wonderful. No. So then why do they do this weird timeline distortion thing and trying to omit from Trump's record the pandemic? Well, there's actually two big reasons. The first is the obvious one. It's not that Trump caused the pandemic. It's that he wildly mismanaged it. And he doesn't want people to remember, and those advocating for him don't want people to remember what it felt like to have a president humiliating you on the world stage as a country. And prioritizing the minimization of his own political harm than that of Americans' harm, admitting to Bob Woodward that he downplayed the significance of the pandemic for political purposes, thus not responding properly to it. Instead of bolstering his public health officials, he would constantly contradict them and take airtime, take the mic himself as the narcissist that he is, and use that valuable time speaking to the American people to just off the cuff speculate about his preferred quote unquote treatment for COVID being bleach and UV inside the body. If people remember what was going on 4 years ago and much of the time after that, they'll remember how Trump mismanaged that crisis and why we voted him out of office in the first place. And then you follow that timeline to after he loses and his attempts to block the peaceful transfer of power through schemes like the Vega elector scheme and pressuring local officials to engage in fraud and the incitement of a mob to attack the Capitol, etc. And there's just no reason to support such an unfit man for office. But the second big reason as to why the, like I said, basis for the argument in favor of Trump relies on a distortion of the actual timeline is because if you remember the reality of the pandemic, both when Trump was handling it and when Biden was handling it, you'll be even more impressed by the presidency of Joe Biden. Because, for example, the economic numbers right now are just strong. Lots of things to be worked on, lots of issues to be addressed. But in any time, these metrics are really strong, whether it be unemployment, wage growth, job growth, stock market performance. But when you look at those metrics within the context of 3 years ago, the situation, when Biden got into office, what he was dealing with, not just taking over a strong economy and trying to make it better, like what Trump got to inherit, but instead taking over a public health, social, and economic crisis, a crisis on all fronts, and taking that to the economic place where we currently are. Whoa. Same thing with crime, for example. Crime right now, by historic standards, pretty low. Want to make it lower for sure, but pretty low. We'll get to that in a second. We'll get to all these numbers, by the way, in a second. But whenever you look at the crime spike that happened in 2020 and then consider the drops under Joe Biden, whoa, then it's even more impressive. And so that's the reality that if people understood it, Trump would lose in a landslide. And so people slowly, hopefully understanding some of these facts and feeling the economic metrics actually in their lives now, or the social stuff like crime in their communities, feeling the actual decrease as we're seeing it in these statistics, that reality should, and I think does, terrify Trump. Now, Chris Hayes did a really good segment on his show that inspired me to do one of my own, so I want to give credit to him. And I would play excerpts from his segment as I normally do in video form, but it's too long and there's just so much that I want to play. So instead, I'll go through a few screenshots of different graphs he showed during it to make some of these points very visual. His point in the segment essentially was, if you look at the story of Joe Biden's presidency, it's taking over a crisis and all the metrics going in the right direction afterwards, just slowly taking things in the right direction. And gross domestic product is the first example. Then you go to the stock market, now, of course, breaking all-time records. Labor force participation rate up and up and up. New business applications even up and up and up. Manufacturing production up and up and up. Average hourly earnings up. Disposable personal income up. Renewable power generation. We'll get to fossil fuels in a little bit, but that's also surging. The consumer price index, now this is one that you want to go down in a major way. There were tons of pandemic-related economic conditions that caused that inflation that we had to deal with, and now it's being dealt with, like I said, in a very significant fashion. Violent crime, whoa, sorry for the podcast listeners, you can't see these visuals, but just down every single year since Biden got into office. And then just two more, the unemployment rate spiking in a pretty historically horrible fashion, then going all the way down to sub 4% for over 2 years, which is a 50-year record. Pretty stunning stuff there. Then you have crude oil production breaking records. Now, I do want to jump over now to a segment also on MSNBC's Morning Joe this time. And what are two of the biggest talking points we hear against Biden in favor of Trump? Joe Biden, we already touched on this a little bit, but shut down energy production somehow, or hindered it, or oil production. He has a war on energy, they'll say, and he's causing crime to spike. Just to properly and thoroughly debunk those, here is a fact checker on MSNBC.
No, crime is not out of control like it's ever been before. And in fact, crime is actually continuing to drop under President Biden. So let's take a look at violent crime. This is per 100,000 people, relationship to our size of our population. And you can see that violent crime actually since 2020 has dropped by 15%, 339 violent crimes per 100,000 people. It's below any place it was during the Trump administration, and it's had this huge drop in 2023. The same is basically true of property crime. You can see here, this is people robbing homes and things of that like. Down 7%, 1,830 per 100,000 people. So this is a complete fiction that crime is up under the Biden administration.
Absolutely. We looked at the violent crime in the previous graphics. Then you hear Trump saying stuff like this a lot, and it's also going to be debunked.
On day one of our new administration, we will end Biden's nation-wrecking war on American energy. He's wrecking the energy business.
Okay, Steve Ratner, again, what are the facts?
Yeah, I mean, wrecking the energy business. So we have had record energy production under the Biden administration. This combines nuclear, fossil fuels, and renewables. And you can see here that we have never had energy production this high. And then the other thing that he says is that he's going to make us energy independent again. Well, the fact is we are energy independent. We've been energy independent now for 5 years. And in fact, our energy exports, mostly oil, but also some natural gas, hit a record last year. So in fact, America we produced more oil than any country in the world has ever produced in history.
So by all of these metrics, again, look at this. Oh my goodness. Energy production, total domestic energy production, higher than it's ever been. We're more energy independent than we've ever been. How many times have you heard, oh, we need Trump back because energy independence? Why would we go back to where we were with him when Biden's crushing his situation? And then oil production specifically, for as much as they talk about oil production shut down under Biden, we're producing more oil in the United States than any country has in the history of the world. You just aren't working with facts when you're working with the mega logic. Crime down, down, down. But they're talking about a crime surge in the United States. But it's down every year under Biden, and currently violent crime, historic lows. What are we talking about? Now, why am I so gobsmacked by this information every time we talk about it? Why am I so stunned to even engage with this conversation? It's not because I think dishonesty is unusual in politics or that these dishonest talking points are crazy to hear from people supporting Trump. No, of course not. It's constant from those defending Trump. It's that a bunch of people who aren't Trump fans necessarily don't understand all this stuff too. A bunch of people, just reasonable, smart voters, aren't aware of a bunch of these metrics, these realities. And that is unfortunate. Hopefully, in whatever small part I can do, I'm helping to inform some people on them, because the argument that gets built in favor of Trump against Biden is all built on a foundation of distortions and delusions and lies often. And if people understand that, Trump could never possibly win. And that's why they have to pretend like 4 years ago something was going on that wasn't. And all of these metrics, I'll remind you, again, insert them into the context of Biden taking over a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. And we're here just 3 years later. What else can be said on it? Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel.